Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We are very happy to have you here with us this morning for our virtual presentation on Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week. We are very honored today to be joined by Dr. Eileen Angelini, who will be presenting her information this morning for our presentation. Those of you who are joining us, this is part of our Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week programming here at the museum. Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week was established in 2019 with the passage of Senate Bill 1828 to educate students about the history and lessons of the Holocaust. During this week, the Holocaust Memorial Museum is honored to bring speakers to school campuses, both in person and virtually, to teach students about the Holocaust and inspire in them a sense of responsibility to recognize and uphold human value to prevent future atrocities. At this time, we are pleased to introduce our speaker for this morning, Dr. Eileen Angelini. Dr. Angelini is a recipient of the 2010-2011 Canada-US Fulbright Award as a Fulbright Visiting Research Chair in Globalization and Cultural Studies at McMaster's University. She received her BA in French from Middlebury College and her MA and PhD in French Studies from Brown University. Dr. Angelini was named to the 2013-2017 Fulbright Specialist roster, was the grantee for the Fulbright Specialist Project, Francophone Culture, Literature, Pedagogy, and Additional Language Acquisition at the University of Manitoba. Presently, Dr. Angelini is Associate Dean of the School for Graduate Studies at SUNY Empire State College. As Associate Dean, Dr. Angelini leads the academic operations of the School for Graduate Studies. In addition, she serves as the SUNY Empire Presidential Task Force to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion. Her projects include work with teacher education faculty to incorporate Holocaust content and pedagogy into mythology coursework, as well as foster interdisciplinary curricular efforts on both the graduate and undergraduate levels. In support of these projects, Dr. Angelini has been named a 2020-2022 United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Holocaust Institute for Teacher Educators Professor, and was invited to participate in the 2020-22 Tolley for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights Summer Seminar. Dr. Angelini's work with Holocaust survivors and documenting the events of World War II occupation of France was recognized by the French government in August 2011 with the award of Knight in the Order of Academic Palms. This award was created by Napoleon Bonaparte in March 1808 as a reward for devotion and accomplishment in the realm of teaching. So at this time, I would like to welcome Dr. Angelini for joining us this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. And it's a true honor for me to be invited back. I was able to present last year and had such a positive experience interacting with all the students and teachers in the San Antonio area. Also, I want to thank you for being here because of all the work that I've done with survivors. You're allowing me to maintain my promise to those who shared their stories with me, because I promised them that they would not be forgotten and that by sharing their stories with future generations, continue to keep the memory alive, but also to prevent future atrocities. So thank you for being here. So if you would like, I can start with my presentation by sharing my screen.
Absolutely. And while Dr. Angelini is doing that, I do want to let our participants know that we do have the Q&A open. So if you have questions during the presentation, you can ask a question in that box. And at the end, we will go through those questions.
Thank you. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. Okay. So as you can well imagine, I'm very passionate about this topic. So I'm going to do my very best not to talk too quickly. And also, please make note of your questions because I will be happy to answer them at the end. So focus on France. Why France? Normally, when people think about the Holocaust, they think about Germany and concentration camps. France had a very, very unique role. And I'm going to begin with that unique role by outlining 4 specific things that France and only France can claim. So 1, they were defeated by the Germans. 2, occupied by the Germans. 3, collaborated with the Germans, and 4, declared victory over the Germans. So I'm going to say this again. 1, defeated by the Germans. 2, occupied by the Germans. 3, collaborated with the Germans. And 4, declared victory over the Germans. Why is this unique? It's unique because most countries will claim 3 of the 4 or 2 of the 4. But France was very divided because of the fact that it's collaborated with the Germans, but at the same time, other people in France, other members of the French government were allies with the United States, the United Kingdom, and the former Soviet Union. So this complicates the narrative for France because you have those people that were collaborating pro-Nazi, that were denouncing Jews, turning them over to the Germans, versus those that were upstanders in helping to rescue the Jews. So what you see in front of you is, I was very honored to be asked to contribute to a chapter of an open education resource that is going to be premiering tonight, edited by Suki John and Michael Pogar, and Penn State is the publisher. So in a week's time, Jessica will be able to share this link with any interested teachers. And if we have time at the end, I can show you the other chapters in this open education resource and not just the 2 chapters that I contributed. This chapter, as you can see, I have a chronology of events in France during World War II from 1939 to 1949. What's nifty about it is it's interactive. So it's streamlined, and it has the dates above. So you see about the German invasion of Poland, and then Great Britain and France declare war on Germany. And then we get to 1940. And what I included in this chronology was what was happening in the United States, as well as what was happening in France or in Europe. So in January 3rd, Franklin Delano Roosevelt called for an increased production of planes. We were not involved in the war at this point, but we were, much like what's happening in Ukraine, we are assisting those that are being attacked in other ways. Okay, so when you work with this timeline, you can see how things slowly start to evolve. Okay, and I want to get to an important date in July 1942, where it is called the Val d'Hiver Roundup. Val d'Hiver stands for Velodrome d'Hiver, a winter cycling stadium. What has happened at this point, it was July 16th and 17th, 1942. And up until this point, France was deporting. I heard some background noise there, sorry. France, up until July 1942, had only been deporting, or mostly been deporting, foreign-born male Jews. The prime minister, by the name of Pierre Laval, and his secretary of the National Police, René Bousquet, worked together to create the Val d'Hiver Roundup, to organize it, because Pierre Laval was heavily anti-Semitic, and he wanted to prove to Hitler that he could round up 25,000 Jews in one day. What happened in this roundup was the people had already been, because of May, having to wear the yellow star in France, as well as to go to their local city hall and register as a Jew and having a Jewish stamp put on their national identity card. They had all these records, so they knew where the Jews lived, they knew how many of them there were, and how they could round them up. And that's why the prime minister said, I'm going to be able to round up 25,000 Jews. However, there were upstanders. There were members of the French resistance that were, the word was getting out, there's going to be this roundup. And it was scheduled originally for July 14th. July 14th is the French national holiday, Bastille Day, in recognition of the French Revolution. So Pierre Laval says, we're not doing it our national holiday. So some of the survivors that I have spoken with said, we went out into hiding on July 12th. Get out there early. The 13th, nothing happens. The 14th, nothing happens. The 15th, nothing happens. So slowly, some of them started to come back into Paris because Pierre Laval was focusing this roundup in Paris. The Val d'Yvres, the Winter Cycling Stadium, is in Paris. Luckily, because not all the Jews came back, they were only able, and I'm saying only able because it's still a high number, they arrested over 13,000 Jews, and they were immediately deported. The men were separated from their children and their wives, and then the wives were separated, the mothers were separated from the children. There are about 8 known survivors, at least that I know of, and I've been fortunate to work with 3 of them and get their testimony of what happened. So this was a major straw that broke the camel's back during the occupation of France, because once this happened, because suddenly they were deporting everybody, the French that were rounded up, they trusted the French police. There were no Germans around. They think, okay, this is my fellow Frenchman, I trust him. And those that were sent on the trains to Auschwitz were immediately gassed. The survivors with whom I've worked were ones that were able to escape out of the holding cycling stadium or the camps that they were put in a few days later. So after the Val d'Yvres roundup, more and more people started to stand up. There were more upstanders. That's why this is such a crucial point in French history. Okay. So, as I said, I continue on till 1944. So what I'd like until 1946. Okay. And this, you can go up and down. So let's go back to 1942. Let me just show you that for a second. Because and this is where you can see about the Val d'Yvres roundup in Paris. Okay. All right. So I'm now going to, and then also if you want to do it this way rather than the arrows, it's very interactive. There's multiple ways of using it. Okay. The chapter includes key people and key terms, but most important for you all is the testimonies that I have included in this chapter. So the first testimony was submitted by Keith Sachs on behalf of his wife, because his wife died in 2015. And she was one of those children that survived. And she was in Paris during the Val d'Yvres roundup. Okay. Now, this is where I'm going to scroll down because I really want to focus on the second testimony, because we have the pleasure of having the daughter of this survivor with us today, and she'll come on, she'll turn a camera on during the question and answer period. For Paquita Sitzer, who I met in October of 2020. Now, Paquita, she's presenting this morning in Caracas, so she couldn't be with us, but her daughter was gracious enough to jump on today. So, and when we get to the question and answer, please give Elizabeth a warm welcome. So what's unique about Paquita for me was she was my first survivor that I interviewed that the interview was done in Spanish, or parts of the interview were done in Spanish, because even though Paquita was born in Paris to Polish parents, her family escaped with the help of an upstander, a rescuer, through Spain. They climbed up the Pyrenees through Spain, and she had some unfortunate events that happened in Spain because of Franco's forces, and then escaping from Spain and eventually landing in Venezuela. So what you will see here, I'm going to read just the first part here. When I was born in Paris on August 23rd, 1937, my parents named me Françoise. The other members of my immediate family were my Polish-born parents, Abraham Belinsky and Estera Markowitz, and my older brother Reinhold. My parents met and married in Berlin in 1929. My brother Reinhold was born in Berlin in 1932. I am honored to share my family's story of escaping Europe during the Holocaust. Being a child, I was a silent participant. The following sections have been divided by time and place. To add clarity, there were sections on what I was told, what I remembered happened, and what I wish I'd asked when my parents and brother were still alive. So what I find extremely special about Paquita's testimony is that she very clearly identifies what she was told, what she remembers, and what I wish I had asked. So I'd like to look a little bit more carefully at one section of what I had remembered and what I wished to ask. And then I'm going to move on to explaining some of the photos that Paquita and her daughter Elizabeth shared with me. So what I remember, my only memory of Paris was hearing sirens and running to a shelter in the basement. It was all dark and a baby was crying. Someone lit a candle. I have no other direct memories of the first years of my life or the stressful situations my parents and brother experienced. What I wish I had asked. What propelled my parents to move from Berlin to Paris when so many of their fellow Jews stayed? We often have questions about why didn't they simply leave? If they knew that Jews were in danger, why didn't they leave? There's a phenomenal Ken Burns documentary that is now on PBS that premiered this past September. And that question is addressed because there's immigration quotas. So while some were able to escape, immigration quotas can often include you need sponsorship from someone in the country. You have to prove that you're economically independent. There's the cost of purchasing the visas and also the actual transportation. So it's not as simple. And remember, there were not fast planes and big planes like we have today. And this is something we can always compare. Like one of the reasons why it's good to examine the past is literally, as the saying goes, history does repeat itself. And things were done in the past, perhaps not as well as they should have been done. And sometimes things were done well, and we can learn from that. So one of the things that I remember from when I first met Paquita was she told me about the experience of her brother being in school, and they were passing out gas masks to all the children except for her brother and the other Jewish children. Gas masks to prepare in the event of an emergency. And the reason they weren't giving the gas masks to the Jewish children is because Jews were being targeted. They didn't count. They weren't worthy of being saved. So for me, that really stuck in my mind because Paquita told me that her brother came home, told his mother what had happened, and the mother went into the school the next day to address the issue. And after that, he no longer went to that school, as my recollection. So we're going through the different times, as once again, what she remembers, what she was told. But let's get to the point where this is a map showing the different routes that were used to escape from France into Spain. important to remember is that France, until the Valdiv Roundup in July 1942, was principally divided into the occupied zone in the north and the western coast, and then southern France. The French government, the collaborative government under Maréchal Pétain, who was a World War I hero from the Battle of Verdun, who was in his 80s and was put in place by Hitler. He was basically a puppet leader, looked upon by the country as like, we can trust Pétain. He saved us in World War I. He had a very grandfatherly image. And with that grandfatherly image, he said, I will give my heart and soul to protect France. It is a good thing for us to capitulate. It's best for France. I'm summarizing briefly. There's a lot more details, but it is important to know that Pétain was in Vichy, France. That was the free zone. So what needed to happen before for anyone trying to escape France, they had to cross that demarcation line between the occupied zone and what was known as the free zone. And there were a lot of what was called a passeur. The word is spelled P-A-S-S-E-U-R, which is someone that would help you escape. It's literally someone that would help you pass from one point or move from one point to the other. So you would have to get someone that could help you cross the demarcation line. Then you're in the free zone. You still are significantly far away from the Pyrenees Mountains. So if you can see, and once again, once this becomes live, I will share it with all the teachers, but you have France here, and you see all the different possible routes that people could take. The smaller one perhaps is a little bit better. This is where Madrid is, but once you got to the south of France, then you had to cross the Pyrenees Mountains on foot. And that is not an easy task. So I'm going to go to here so you can see the picture. This is Victor Mesblesomp. He is the upstander, the rescuer that helped Paquita and her family escape from France. So as you can see, this is not an easy walk. These are very rugged mountains that people had to cross on foot. If a rescuer was caught helping a Jew, oftentimes they were shot on the spot. In Victor's case, he was deported to a camp that he did not survive. And so I'm going to go down a little bit more to some other pictures. This is special. I'm going to read the description here so I don't rely solely on my memory. A Women's Association in August 2012 of Les hosted Paquita, where she spoke about her experiences in 1942. I know this is very important to Paquita to be able to thank those that helped her. And so the next photo, you can see Paquita with her daughter Elizabeth here. And then right here, if you look at this picture, this is Paquita as a little girl with her mother. And this is when Paquita spoke about, she's age 78, this is 2015, with her daughter Elizabeth, talking about the experience of crossing the Pyrenees. Okay. And then this is another nice photo that Paquita shared with me. And this is a bunt pan that was shipped from Paris to Morocco to Venezuela, and she still uses it today. So that's a very precious family item. So I'm going to ask Elizabeth now to turn on her camera. We have about 5 minutes, Elizabeth, before we do questions and answers, but I thought You could supplement what I just described, and if there's any specific details you want to share with the students about your mother's experience. And if you need me to go back to a specific picture or the timeline, just let me know. You are muted, my dear.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here and for taking the time to learn about an important part of the history of the world. And I apologize for my mother. She's not here because this morning she is in Venezuela where she lives, and she's actually speaking to a group of children at a school in Venezuela in honor of Holocaust Memorial Day, which is this week. The experiences of my mother are the experiences of a child. So while she does have an amazing memory, but I think what haunts her are the questions, like, you know, what we don't know. So we try to piece things together. And when she was a child and when she was growing up, and even when I was growing up, people didn't speak about the Holocaust because a lot of people wanted to forget. So, and I use this as an invitation because many of you may have parents that also emigrated to the United States, or grandparents that came to the United States and had a challenging situation. So I urge you to ask your family questions about their background. My mother's recollections is she had it sounds strange, but she feels that she had a good childhood. Her parents shielded her as much as possible from the difficult situations that were happening. And she's very grateful for the opportunity to have escaped. And she's aware of the fact that she had nothing to do with it. She was a 5-year-old child that was basically doing whatever she was supposed to do. But some of the memories she shared with us, for example, after they left Paris and were in the south of France, the government was giving people ration cards. It was wartime, so you couldn't go to a supermarket necessarily to buy things. You had ration cards that would allow you to get the food you needed. And they were in an area where there were a lot of farmers. So my grandfather would exchange the ration cards. Since this is France, they also got ration cards for wine and cigarettes. So he would exchange the ration cards for wine and cigarettes for milk, eggs, and other things. He would barter for those cards. So in general, the message I think my mother would like to share is that we are here. You know, there are many people that are here thanks to the kindness of others who helped along the way. And in the case of Victor Mesplisson, who was the person in the resistance that helped plan their escape from France to Spain, he paid with his life because eventually somebody did tell the police this person is a member of the resistance and he helps Jewish people. So it is a miracle for us to be here, and for her, as Eileen said, as Dr. Angelini said, it was important to go back to Spain to be able to be in the area where this happened, to see the mountains, and it's just a miraculous thing. And in Spain, because of because there was Franco was in power there, a lot of the people who helped Jewish people or others escape are anonymous. Many people helped, and even their family members don't know who they helped. So if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, or if anyone, you know, I'm happy to answer that. And again, thank you so much for coming and participating in this event.
Elizabeth, I have one thing that I was going to say, but I would like you to address. Why was it so important for your mother that you were born in the US and be a US citizen, even though she still currently lives in Venezuela and that's where her family had stayed?
Thank you. So my mother knew from a very, I'm sorry, it's very emotional.
Take your time. Take your time.
She knew from an early age that having the right papers, that having the right visas, that being able to have the right documents was not to go on vacation. It was a life-saving. So for her, when she had a child, when I was born, she knew that a US passport was like a golden ticket. So even though she was living in Argentina, my father was from, after the war, went to Argentina. So even though she was living in Argentina, she convinced my father that her firstborn, that I should be born in the United States. And when I was born, they didn't have jets. So it was like a propeller plane. People thought she was crazy, but they flew to New York and I was born here. I have a brother who's about 18 months younger than I am, and he was not born here. So and at that time, I think the Vietnam War was starting. They were recruiting people for the, to go to war, and it was more complicated. But for her, just having the right documents is something that is very important.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. We still have 5 more minutes before we do the formal Q&A, but Jessica, if you want to get started with that, because with having Elizabeth here with me, we can go with that, or I can add things, but just let me know how you would like to proceed.
So we did have a question, if either of you would like to answer it, which, by the way, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We are very appreciative and happy to have you here. So the question is if you can maybe give us a little more information about the people that helped the people escape, the people that helped people escape, and in particular that helped your mother to escape.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. My grandfather was arrested in Paris and somehow managed to escape. And from there was a network, an informal network of resistance. These were people that either for political reasons, for ethical reasons, for philosophical reasons, did not agree with what was going on in Europe. They did not agree with Hitler's policies, and they did not agree with the fact that the governments were going along. So this is before, there were telephones. This was before the internet. This was before a lot of social media that we have today. So people had secret ways of figuring out who would help you or who wouldn't. When my grandfather escaped, again, we don't know how he got out of where he was arrested. And he went to the south of France because, as Dr. Angelini said, that area was still not under the occupation of the Nazis. And once he was there, he basically kind of found out who he went actually sort of door to door to find a job. My grandfather was a tailor. And Victor Mesplessom, who's the gentleman in this picture on the left, he owned a small factory, a clothing factory. So he said to my grandfather that he would employ him, and also told my grandfather that he would help him get his family, his wife, my grandmother, and his 2 children, my mother and my uncle, out of Paris where they were. And I only found this out now when helping Dr. Angelini write for this, but the pot that I still use to this day, the bunt pan that I still use to this day, I always thought they brought that over the mountains with them. But I came to find out now that there was a relative who came with a wheelbarrow to my grandparents' apartment in Paris and packed up things that they needed for wherever they were going to go. So this was a relocation where they knew where they were starting, but they didn't know where they were ending. And that person shipped these items to my grandmother's brothers, who had been members of the French Foreign Legion. So they moved to Morocco. So these items were shipped to Morocco, and we never knew when, the family didn't know when they were going to get them back. In Pau, which is the city in the south of France where Victor Mesplessom lived and where my grandfather was, they arranged for my grandfather to return to Paris, I'm guessing by train, and bring back his family. They arranged for a small home where the family could live. And they lived a tranquil life. My mother went to kindergarten and everything was fine until they realized that the fighting kept coming. So that's when, again, they found the passeurs, the people that smuggle you across the mountains. And this is what happened in October of 1942.
Elizabeth, thank you for saying us to smuggled, because I was struggling with what passa, the word in English, because my brain was more in French. So a passa is a smuggler. So
Yes.
thank you.
Mhm.
Muted. Another question is, Dr. Angelini, earlier when you talked about the roundup, you talked about how the French collaboration. The question is, why? Why was it so important for the French officials to collaborate with the Nazis, or why did the French officials collaborate with the Nazis? Is I think the gist of the question.
Okay, so I can address that. Before the German invasion, even before Hitler came to power in the 30s, early 1930s, the Communist Party gained control of the government in France. So some of the things that happened were the Communist Party, France normally, historically, traditionally is a Catholic country. So there was prayer in the schools. Well, the Communist Party said, you know, we don't have just Catholics in this country. So it removed that restriction of having Catholic prayers in public schools. So that was a giant shift to have the Communist Party in control. So the ousted party, which was the far right, when Hitler came in, they were more than delighted to collaborate so they could regain control of the French government. So that's a very short, concise way of explaining it. What's important to remember is that Pierre Laval, who was the prime minister, was a party hopper. He actually started out on the left and then moves slowly to the right to gain, stay in power. But his entire life, he was heavily anti-Semitic. The other thing that started to happen was the French Catholic Church was starting to say, hey, wait a minute, you're starting to deport Jews. And Pierre Laval, basically with René Bousquet, said, keep quiet or we're going to take away your tax privileges. So the Catholic Church was quiet for a while. And then after Valdiv, that literally was the straw that broke the camel's back. And people started like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And Pétain, after 2 years, people were starting to get suspicious and feeling, because your average French citizen was feeling the restrictions of ration cards and seeing the Germans, because Germany could not have survived the war as long as they did without the French farming system and the French industrial system, that all that was being sent in to help the German war machine. And the French started to feel that as well. So in the beginning, the far right members of the government were happy to collaborate. And that's why Pierre Laval wanted to prove, yeah, I'm a solid leader. This is my role, and we're going to get rid of all the Jews, and I'm going to be better than Hitler. So thank you for that question.
And then we did have a question for Elizabeth. You mentioned learning about the history of the pan that you use in this process. Is there anything else that you learned in the process of assisting Dr. Angelini about your mother's story that was surprising or that impacted you in some way?
So obviously hearing the story as a child, and I'm thinking of they're going over the mountains, the image in my mind was, the last scene in the movie The Sound of Music, where they escape Austria and you just see the mountains, but you don't see really the struggles of going over the mountains. You don't feel the fear of, will I be going over or not? My mom is 85 and she walks with a cane now, but she is a fast walker. And she always tells me that she was always a fast walker because she was told, we need to walk fast, the Nazis are coming behind us. And that, as a child, that's a memory that stays with her. My mother also is a person who has been instrumental in helping other people, helping any way you can, because very grateful to the fact that they were helped. and in our case, because we were Jewish people, we were persecuted because we were Jewish people. But in the world, many ethnicities are persecuted. Minorities are persecuted. People who feel that they are in the majority or in the right. There are always people that are persecuted. And if there's a message, my mom is not here, but if there would be a message, it would be that, who we are or what we are is an accident of birth. You're born into a certain place. You're born into some things that you have no control over. And it saddens her very much that to this day, we're now in 2023, that there are still people that are being targeted for their race, their religion, ethnicity, or other things, which is just sad that human beings cannot be more evolved and let everyone kind of be. So, thank you.
Keep reading that part. We're almost out of time, but I do have a couple more questions. So this is part of our Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week programming, in which we bring education and stories to students here in Texas. And I just wanted to ask with both of you, why is it important that we share these stories and we teach about the Holocaust to students today?
What I would just like to say, because this is not something that happened in a history book. I mean, I am alive today because somebody helped my grandparents get out of Europe. And because we have to understand that history is real. The opportunity to meet a Holocaust survivor now is almost non-existent. Most of them are over 90 and they're not here. But this is not a video game. This is not fantasy. This is reality. This is stories that happen to people. I'm sure that in the audience, again, people that have come to the States should speak to their parents and grandparents and see what tribulations they passed. And we can learn from history and hopefully make this a better world.
I would also add that it's important to have role models like Victor, who did what was right, that had the courage to stand up, to do what was right, to help others. That it's not impossible to help. Because too often people say, oh, that's too hard. It's not that hard to care. Little things every single day, small acts of human kindness make the largest difference in someone's life. And that's important to remember and to be good to one another. We need kindness in the world.
I think that is a wonderful message to end on for this morning. So again, thank you both so much for being here with us this morning and participating in this presentation. Thank you to our audience members as well. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.